Russian fishing vessels can still stop over in Kirkenes and 2 other Norwegian ports for now. Moscow demanded continued access in exchange for keeping alive a 50-year-old agreement protecting cod stocks. But after a recent documentary publicly exposed what intelligence officials have long known, that many of Russia's fishing ships double as spy ships, the Norwegian government is reevaluating whether the deal is worth the risks.
The question is, how closely do you monitor? Are you able to monitor those ships that are coming in? Which ships are allowed in? And is this necessary to, as the government says, maintain this fishing cooperation with Russia? This is a difficult balance.
Do you think that other NATO allies now see Norway as a weak link in security?
I don't think so. And if the government gets the impression that efficient control isn't possible anymore, they will have to close the ports.
To better exercise that control and avoid the negative repercussions of closing the ports completely, the government has boosted the budget for inspecting the Russian vessels. It's also investigating more than a dozen companies suspected of illegally doing business with Russia. But still, in Kirkenes, the threat of banning Russian ships altogether hangs heavy over a town whose income has already been severely reduced by the sanctions.
There will always be a before and after the invasion. Absolutely. For us living here, it will be before and after.
Jenny Spring grew up here and now works supporting business opportunities and people-to-people connections in the region. She says many days it's hard to be optimistic.
I think that every single shop owner in Kirkenes has been affected by the war, because before the war a lot of Russians came to do shopping in Kirkenes.
Spring says this hasn't turned Kirkenes residents against the sanctions, but they're worried.
So for example at Kimek, the shipyard, they have 83 employees, so it's a huge business for our size, this community. So of course if they get unemployed, that's a catastrophe for our community.
The Kimek shipyard dominates Kirkenes, visually and economically. It's seen its income slashed by sanctions that allow only emergency repairs to Russian ships, not regular maintenance. The vessels may also land fish hauls. The owner of the Kimek shipyard has long warned he might have to cut those jobs if the port is completely closed to Russian vessels, but he refused our request for an interview. Other Kirkenes residents were willing to speak out about their concerns at a town hall meeting with Norwegian Trade Minister Jan Christian Vestre.
It's our job now to find solutions, to bring some hope and some new ideas. We cannot and will not let Russia win this war. So we have to deal with the sanctions, and then we have to make sure that this transition for this community can be done in the best possible way.
Keeping far northern towns populated is a pillar of Norway's national security strategy. So Kirkenes' survival is something Oslo has to prioritize. Local businessman Niels Royn believes everyone will work together to keep Kirkenes alive.
Do you think there are enough other things that can be done here without the Russian ship traffic?
Yes, definitely. And we are having a lot of good companies that are earning money. They are increasing their opportunities. They have new ideas. So I'm optimistic that this community, together with the government, together with everyone in Norway, understands the importance to keep the sustainable society here.
Port Director Terje Jürgensen has some ideas, ones that might be controversial.
We're talking with Chinese operators, and that is also a delicate question. And we may be accused of going from intimate cooperation with Russia to intimate cooperation with China. But as long as there is one T-shirt going from Asia to Europe, it should go through the Northern Sea route.
It remains to be seen how NATO allies may feel about that solution. But for now, the priority is keeping undersea infrastructure and communication cables safe from Russian vessels trawling for more than fish.
That report from Terry Schultz, who joins us now. Welcome, Terry. So tell us more about Norway's reasons for continuing to allow these Russian ships in.
Well, Phil, it's really not so simple as just closing the ports and that taking care of all the problems. This 50-year-old deal with Russia is really aimed at preserving the sustainability of the cod stocks, not just for now, not just to get through the current crisis, but really for generations to come. And this is something that Norway is very interested in keeping alive. Russia has threatened to cut off that deal if the access to the ports is cut off. So Norway is really trying to balance its national security, the security of NATO allies, with the sustainability of one of its main industries, and that is fishing. And it believes that by limiting the access to just these 3 ports and by beefing up inspections through its customs officials, that it will be able to keep a cap on these spying activities.
Right. And the Norwegian documentary seemed to suggest that spying from these ships was actually increasing. What more can you tell us?
This was a broadcast by the 4 public broadcasters in the Nordic countries, the Danes, the Norwegians, the Swedes, and the Finns. And it was quite remarkable in that journalists spent a year tracking these Russian ships that often move around without their transponders on, which means that you can't really see where they're going. But they used a lot of means to show that there may be as many as 2,000 ships conducting these surveillance activities while they pretend to be fishing or doing other kinds of research. And while intelligence officials have known this was happening, I think that this going public really shocked the public. They didn't understand how prevalent these activities are. And so that put pressure on the Norwegian government to make sure that sanctions are being followed, that it's only very limited services being provided to these Russian ships so that they can't continue these surveillance activities so much. But they're really considering now if it looks like the Russians are continuing to increase spying, then they may have to completely cut them off.
And as you hinted at in your report, the ports are a massive local employer. People there must be very conflicted about what's going on.
They're conflicted about some of it. I think that they're used to living in a very friendly relationship with Russia up until the sanctions imposed over Russia's war on Ukraine. People crossed back and forth easily, even for things as simple as filling their gas tanks or doing their everyday grocery shopping in both directions. They could go 30 kilometers into each other's countries without visas. So this was a big change in lifestyle. At the same time, all the citizens of Kirkenes that I spoke to said, Russia cannot act this way. We can't let them get away with this. We support the sanctions, but we're suffering from them.
And so, of course, there's NATO to consider in this as well. How does NATO feel about Russian ships still being allowed to dock in ports in alliance territory?
I think they understand the Norwegian reasons for leaving open this limited access. At the same time, the undersea infrastructure is extraordinarily important there. I mean, we saw that just with this Nord Stream sabotage, how important it was, how critical and actually how vulnerable it was. There are also a lot of communication cables there that carry messages, banking messages back and forth between Europe and the United States. So they are really very concerned about the security of this undersea infrastructure. At the same time, Norway is a very stalwart NATO ally. The Secretary General is Norwegian, so you can imagine that communication is quite good between the allies. And I think at the moment they trust Norway to really crack down on this surveillance activity and to increase their inspection activities. But I think that there would be a lot of pressure on Norway if there is any other sabotage activities taking place or any other sign that really Russia is getting the upper hand in this.
Thanks for that, Terry. DW correspondent Terry Schultz.